She didn't cry about her daughter. She cried about a 4-year-old she's never held. Helen is 61. Her daughter stopped speaking to her 3 years ago. No warning, no explanation she could make sense of. Just a text saying she needed space, and then silence. If you'd asked Helen on the day she first got in touch with me what she was struggling with, she would have said her daughter. That was the loss she led with. That was the wound she'd been trying to explain to her friends, her GP, her therapist. Her daughter, the estrangement. But 10 minutes into our first call, when I asked about the grandchildren, Helen stopped. She went very quiet. And then she said, "I've never even held her. She's 4 years old and I've never held her." That was the real grief. It had been sitting underneath everything else the whole time. If you find this content useful, please like and subscribe, and I'll keep them coming to you. I put these out regularly. So, Helen had a granddaughter, Maisie, born about 8 months before the estrangement began, and a grandson, Jack, born almost 2 years later. Maisie is 4 now, Jack is 2. Helen knows their birthdays because she can see them on Facebook. Photos her daughter's husband posts sometimes, which haven't been blocked. She doesn't know if Maisie and Jack know she exists. She doesn't know if her name has ever been said in that house. She sees Maisie's face on her phone screen. She watches Jack learn to walk in a 30-second clip posted on a Tuesday afternoon. She has never been in the same room as either of them. I want to stay with this for a moment. If you're a parent going through estrangement, you'll know the particular pain of losing the relationship with your adult child. That loss is very real and it's brutal. But what I want to talk about today is the loss that often sits underneath it. One that's harder to explain to anyone who hasn't been through it. And for many parents, more painful than the estrangement itself. Missing your grandchildren is a different kind of grief. When you lose the relationship with your adult child, there is a shared history between you. Years of it. Complexity on both sides. Things said and things not said. Choices that can be looked at honestly and at some point worked with. That doesn't make it any less painful, but it is a grief between two people who have actually known each other. Missing your grandchildren when they're small is something entirely different. These aren't people who choose to leave you. They had no say. They're growing up inside a world where you are not present, and they may not know why, or that there is a why. Maisie doesn't know her grandmother was on the other side of a phone screen watching her birthday party unfold in photographs. Jack doesn't know his name was what Helen said out loud alone in her kitchen when she saw the birth announcement on Facebook at 7 in the morning. There's a specific feeling to this grief that I want to talk about because I don't hear many people talking about it. It's the birthday that comes and goes and you don't know if they even have a vague sense that you exist. It's buying a card for a 2-year-old and putting it in a drawer because you have no address to send it to. It's watching their face change in photographs and knowing you are a stranger to them through no choice of yours or theirs. It's knowing that somewhere right now they're doing something ordinary. Eating breakfast, playing in a garden, and you are entirely absent from that life. And underneath all of that is a question you can't answer. Will they one day want to know who you are? And if they do, who will you be? Most of what's out there about this situation is legal. Grandparents' rights, visitation statuses, court orders. I understand why parents go in that direction. You can see the clock ticking. Months and years your grandchildren's lives are passing and someone tells you there might be legal recourse. Of course you look into it. But I've worked with parents who have gone down that road. And what I've seen is that in most cases, legal action makes the estrangement situation worse. It puts your adult child on the defensive in the most formal way imaginable. It can harden positions that might otherwise have eased over time. And even when parents win some form of access through the courts, the atmosphere around those visits is often tense enough that the grandchildren feel it. Now, I'm not saying legal routes are never the right call. There are circumstances where they may be. But before you do anything, before you talk to a lawyer, before you write another message to your son or daughter, this grief needs to be dealt with properly. And most people haven't done that. They've been too busy trying to fix it. Back to Helen. When we started working together, she was exhausted from trying to find an answer. She'd spent months gathering legal information she'd never quite acted on. She'd written and deleted dozens of messages to her daughter over 3 years. She'd been in therapy, read every book she could find, done everything a conscientious person does when they're trying not to fall apart. But she had never once allowed herself to simply grieve Maisie and Jack as her grandchildren. Not as evidence of how much she'd lost, just as Maisie and Jack. Two small people she loved completely and had never been able to show it to. I asked her something to try. Write Maisie a letter, not to send, not to give to anyone, a letter from a grandmother to a granddaughter, telling her what she wanted her to know, who she was, what she wished for her, what she'd been thinking about since the day Maisie was born. Helen told me she wasn't sure if she could do it, and she did it anyway. She called me the following week and said it had been the hardest thing she'd done through the whole 3 years. Harder than the legal research, harder than the unanswered messages, harder than anything. Because it was the first time she'd allowed herself to actually be Maisie's grandmother. She had spent 3 years trying to get back into her daughter's life. She hadn't spent much time being present to Maisie and Jack, to who they were right now, to what she hoped for them, to what she wanted to say if the door ever opened. That letter changed something in her. The grief was still there, but it became something she could hold. You cannot make your adult child let you in. You cannot force access to your grandchildren through trying harder, waiting more patiently, or loving them more desperately. If that were possible, you'd have already done it. What you can do is stay true to yourself. The parents who eventually rebuild something with their adult children, who one day get to know their grandchildren, are almost never the ones who fought hardest. They are almost always the ones who kept alive in themselves the person their grandchildren would eventually have a relationship with. Present, curious, whole, not hollowed out by years of desperate waiting. When Maisie is 12 and starts asking her own questions, there needs to be a grandmother to find. When Jack is 15 and gets curious about who his family is and where he comes from, there needs to be someone there. Now, that is years from now. But who he finds is the person you are becoming right now inside this, in the choices you make about how to live. Helen is still not in contact with her daughter. She still hasn't held Maisie or Jack, but she writes to both of them now. A letter for Maisie, a letter for Jack, kept in a folder on her desk. Sometimes a paragraph, sometimes 3 pages. She writes about what she's been thinking, what she sees when she looks at their photographs, what she wants them to know about who she is, what she'd want to say if they ever asked. She's being a grandmother, quietly in private, with nothing to show for it on the outside world. I asked her recently if it helped. And she said, I don't know if it helps, but I couldn't stop now. It's the only real thing I've got. And that is it, exactly. There are no shortcuts through the scale of this grief. The pull to turn it into a legal question, to take action so you feel like you're doing something. I understand all of that. Not doing anything when you're inside a loss this specific feels unbearable. But holding this grief, staying present to it, refusing to let it take over your life too, that's important, and not just for you. For Maisie and Jack, who are growing up right now, who may one day want to know who you are. Be someone worth finding. If you have grandchildren you're missing, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, when did it hit you that this was its own grief, separate from everything else? If you want to talk to people who actually understand what this is like, you can join the Reconnection Path, my free community for estranged parents. There are people in there who know exactly what it feels like to watch a grandchild grow up on the wrong side of a screen. The link is in the notes below this video. Maisie and Jack don't know who their grandmother is. Helen does. And that is the beginning of everything that comes next. Thank you for listening. Much love.